Hi, my name is Hannah, and today I'm going to teach you how to make a tiny acrylic landscape painting. Let's get started. We'll be using 3 palette knives. Make sure you have one with a very sharp point on it. I'm going to be making 2 versions of blue, green, yellowy orange, and mauve. Now remember, you can pause at any time because I do understand that it is kind of a workout to keep up with someone painting. And keep in mind, I also add red later. I'm going to start with a good amount of white because I want to start with my very brightest, lightest sky blue. Remember that a little goes a really long way, so just add the tiniest bit of blue. Oftentimes we start with a lot of color and then we try to add a lot of white to it to get it up to where we want it to be, and that's a pretty good way to end up with so much paint that it's really hard to handle with your palette knife. Now that I've got that light blue done, I'm going to work on my darker blue. I'm just going to go ahead and build upon with more blue and more black and more white just to see where it gets me. It's becoming a little bit bolder than I want, so I'm actually going to add some orange to it. Just a tiny bit at a time. I can always add more. I can't really ever take away. So opposite of the color wheel from blue is orange. If you have a bright, bold color and you want to make it more muted, use the color on the exact opposite side of the color wheel to make it more dusty, more pastel-y. So I'm kind of working with this blue. It just takes time to get the colors that you want. I highly encourage people who are learning to paint to just spend time mixing paint, maybe just set a timer for 30 minutes and just start mixing your paints together and see what happens, because it's amazing how the tint in each different color can have such a huge impact. So you can see I'm really taking my time, I'm working with the color, I'm stretching it out to get exactly what I want. Now I'm going to move on to making my darker green. When I'm using colors in a similar family, you can see I'm not really worried about mixing my green on top of my blue because I know a little bit of this blue in my dark green is not really going to be a problem. You can see as I'm stretching it out that it feels a little bit too vibrant for what I'm going for in this painting, so I'm actually going to add some orange. Although the exact opposite color is red, I do like that the orange has yellow in it, which is just going to add an extra layer of warmth. Another fun thing when you're doing a painting and you want a cohesive palette is to add some of your colors to every other color. And that might sound a little bit complicated, but I kind of group into cool tones and warm tones. So when I'm mixing like my blues and greens, see I'm allowing those other colors to mix together. And that allows all of the colors to have a cohesive feel. Now I'm moving on to my lighter green. The green that I'm using has a little bit more yellow to it, so I am actually dampening it to red. I ended up adding it later on. And as I was mixing it, realized it is way too sagey and I'm getting more towards brown than I feel comfortable with. So I'm actually going to add some of the green, which has more of a blue undertone to kind of combat it. You can see even though I've done many paintings, I've been painting for a long time, I still just have to work with the color until it's exactly where I want it to be. And because the whole theme of this painting is pastels, I really want it to be just a really soft color. Now that I have finished the cool colors, I'm going to move on to warm, and I'm going to wipe off my palette in between because I don't really like mixing colors between the warm and cool palettes because it can kind of make it just harder. I'm going to start off the warm colors by making a soft yellow, and of course starting with white, a lot more white than my darker color. So I am adding a little bit of orange for some warmth because I'm not going for a pure brilliant yellow. I'm going for something really soft and kind of a creamy yellow. The lighter colors can almost be harder to mix because you want to have good lighting. I really prefer daylight instead of, painting at night with a lamp on, because you really need to be able to see those tints. And that's pretty much only possible when you have really good daylight kind of lighting. And you can see this is actually kind of giving me trouble. I thought adding some more orange would help, and it obviously didn't. So I'm going back to the yellow. I am honestly referencing my other colors that I put on my other palette, just looking back and forth often to see if these colors are going to work together. There we go. I finally have something that looks cohesive with the other colors on my palette. So we're going to call this good. I'm going to move on to orange now. And because I want to get a good feel of what the orangey kind of yellow color is going to be, I'm going to start with the darker colors. I'm going to mix them together until I get a good orange shade before kind of cutting it apart and then adding some white. I'm allowing blue to go in with that white because I know that the blue is going to dampen and make that orange more muted and pastel-y. So you can see I'm still just having to work with it. It's a little bit too dark. I need to add more white and see where that takes me. Adding white is also another good way to clearly see your darker colors. So yeah, I definitely like how this feels a little bit more. And I'm just going to keep working with it until I get what I like. I'm going to move on to my mauve color, and I'm starting with my light pink because it's kind of a white just with a little bit of a red tint to it. Makes it a little bit easier for the mixing process. And when you add your dark to lighter color, a little goes a really, really long way. And you can see where I did not do very well with that because I added too much blue to my red. So I'm ending up with this darker purple with blue in it, so I'm having to backtrack and add more red, more pink, because again, in this case, the pink is my lighter color, more white, just to get it to that mauve, and mauve is far more red than it is blue. This mauve is finally where I like it, and boy, was that a struggle. And I'm going to move on to my lighter mauve / pink color, doing light pink and white and mixing that together, allowing the mauve underneath to kind of mix in with it, which again allows for that cohesion in the colors. It makes them look like they really belong together. So yeah, this is our last color to mix up before we get started. I've got all of my little blobs now. I'm going to move this palette out of the way and get my space ready. Some people ask, why do I do the blobs? And that helps acrylic paint to not dry out because it does that very quickly. I'm going to also add some white because I'm going to use that for clouds. I have a 5x7 canvas board from Walmart. Hobby Lobby, Michaels, you can get them anywhere. It's really easy to paint and pop in a frame later on. I'm starting with my medium rounded edge palette knife, and I'm going to use it upside down. I'm going to scoop and lift up to my very lightest blue, and I'm going to make my first strokes across the canvas. I'm holding my palette knife very gently. I am doing light strokes. I'm not worried about filling in all the gaps because I know I will go over again with my darker blue and my white as well to make clouds and keep my canvas in place. That's also difficult to do. I'm going to go in now with my darker blue. This adds a nice depth to the sky. And again, with my palette knife, I'm holding it really loosely. You can see I'm holding it with 2 fingers. I should be able to wiggle it when I tap it with my pointer finger. I'm just barely grazing the surface of the canvas because I want it to have those bumps that add texture. If I go over the same place too many times, you will see it start to blend, and I don't want it to blend. I want the paint to kind of sit on top for each layer. I'm going to pull this paint down to a little bit over halfway down my canvas because whatever I leave white has to be covered by the hills I'm going to do in the future. So I don't want to have to pull up my mountains too high. I want to give myself space to work them up rather than getting too high and then not having room to work with them. I'm going to go to my tiny palette knife with the round edge, and I'm going to grab some white and start on my clouds. This is all very loose. I don't exactly have a plan of where they're going, but I am being very careful to just let them flow. And you can see right here where I pushed too hard and I did too many times and it started to blend. So I am often wiping off my palette knife between strokes. I do a few wipe it off because whenever you are adding to your canvas, if you touch it enough times, you press hard enough, you're going to pick up paint from the canvas and you're going to take it places where maybe you didn't really want it to go. So have a wet paper towel next to you that is ready for you to wipe that palette knife on often. Back to my medium palette knife, I'm going to be scooping up dark green, light green, and alternating orange and yellow for the mountains. I am just going to put a little bit of each. It doesn't have to have any certain rhyme or rhythm. I just want to get a little bit of those colors onto my same palette knife because I want them to flow together in one single stroke. And honestly, this is my favorite part of the painting. It is so satisfying for that first draw. And I'm just going to keep pushing it along. I don't want to push too hard. I want these mountains to kind of just evolve as I keep making strokes. I might add dark and light here and there. I know I want it to have parts that are dark, parts that are light with highlights, but I'm kind of letting the paint do its thing. And as soon as I see something that I like, I stop and I don't keep messing with the paint there. So this mountain range is naturally kind of forming to the right. You can see the hill coming down. I've added the dark because it's kind of making a natural valley and adding highlights to the places to make it have some depth to it. Now I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. I'm going to use some yellow this time to kind of mix up the highlights. And I'm going to start going from the upper left side down towards the middle for my other mountain range. I didn't plan exactly where these mountains are going to be. I am just kind of letting it happen and exploring. And as I'm painting it, I'm finding that there's this kind of imaginary ridge moving its way down. So I then turn my palette knife to another direction to just kind of allow it to happen. And I don't have a section where I have too thick of a band of color. I'm really allowing it to mesh all together. At this point, I am kind of imagining that the sun is coming from the left side of my painting. So I'll put some highlights on these left sides, allow the shadows to be on the right side. So yeah, the dark green being my shadows, the yellow being more of my sunlight, and adding more darkness to that valley in the background. Now that I've kind of figured out where the light is coming from, you might find that your mountains are going to look totally different, be in different places. That's totally fine. I'm just working on the bottom half of the painting being covered in some shades of green. Now I'm going to move on to my front hill, and you can see I'm giving it a different direction than the back two. It's going to be going in front of them, so I'm not going to be too worried about going over some of my past strokes. And I will be adding some dark in certain places just to help differentiate it from the background to the foreground. And all of these, well, the bottom part of it is mostly going to be covered with florals anyway, so I'm not too concerned about how it looks on the very bottom of my painting. You can see here that I added more dark green just to really separate this front hill from the background. I'm going to take my very pointy palette knife now and dip it in my green. I kind of dip just one side of it in. I'm going to be pointing downwards and tapping the background hills of my painting to give the illusion that there are far away florals, which means we have to start with green before we can add any kind of florals onto it. So I'm just tapping kind of in a random pattern. There's not really too much rhyme or reason except that I will turn my palette knife as I'm seeing strokes happen. So I feel like if they're too short and straight, I might turn it so I'm getting more dots. You just want to make sure you don't have a big blob of paint on the end of your palette knife, because one little tap and you just have a nice splotch there that you might not necessarily care for. So I'm going to do that all around the back, making sure I leave some natural spaces between the sections of little taps. So now along my front mountains, I am going to add a few tiny little bushes, and my tapping pattern is different here because I'm keeping them all clustered together. There is a little bit of going up and going down in kind of clusters, as if there were bushes just on the tip of this small hill. And yeah, tapping it lots of times. I'm allowing it to come down a little bit just to give the illusion that the bushes are not just, sitting on top of the peak, but they are naturally kind of covering the hill. I'm going to do the same thing along this side, just adding some greenery, tapping along. This is a process that requires a lot of patience because it's not as rewarding as doing the florals later on, but it is an important part of giving the painting depth. So give it the time that it requires. So now I'm going to grab my palette knife again and dip it a little bit more on the side, and I'm going to do those long strokes of grass in the bottom part of my painting. I'm going to allow these grass blades to go every which way, and I'm not going to make them super high, but I am going to have some that are shorter that will feel further away, and the taller ones are going to feel very close to me. So I'm going to go in with this dark green first and get it kind of all along the bottom. I go in again using my palette knife more at a flat angle, going along the bottom to just really stretch down those grass blades toward the bottom of my canvas to make it feel like you're standing in the grass and it's feeling full. It's not feeling like the grass is just kind of hanging out above the bottom of the canvas. We really want it to feel grounded and connected. I'm going to take my lighter green and kind of add some highlights to my grass blades. It doesn't have to be every one, just here and there. We're imagining the sun is shining from the left side, so we need a little bit of a lighter color to make it have that perspective. I'm gonna go in now for some background florals. I'm gonna start with my yellow color with this the tiniest dot, even smaller than when we did the green back there, and just add the tiniest dots I possibly can to represent flowers being really far away. You might hold it upside down, turn your palette knife to the left, to the right, as you're trying to figure out how to make the smallest possible dots, kind of scattered all throughout. I'm gonna work my way forward with slightly bigger dots. This is kind of my middle range. I'm gonna have my tiniest ones in the far back, my medium-sized dots on the hills closer, and then my largest size dots are gonna be reserved for my grass. I'm gonna go for my mauve color now, and I'm just gonna keep adding similar sized dots along these bushes in the foreground hills. And yeah, just have fun with it. It doesn't have to be exactly how I'm doing it. Just add it where you imagine would benefit your painting. Now friends, this is the fun part. This is where you get to take your palette knife, go upside down, get yourself a nice clean blob with no little things sticking out the side, and press it gently down onto your blades of grass. I'm going to be making a longer flower with many little petals, so I'm going to take the time to make sure I get a really good scoop of paint. When I pull, I'm going upside down because I don't want to scoop and then have a random string of paint hanging off the side. You won't get a clean petal that way, so that's why I do it upside down. And I'm wiping off my palette knife between every petal. It is a very time-consuming part of the painting, but it is so worth it. It just adds texture like you can't get if you're gonna rush through it. So give yourself the time to do it well. I love adding different shades, colors, shapes, and depths of flower. So I'll have a couple of these flowers that just have 2, maybe 3 petals. And the ones that are my medium-sized ones, I typically stick with 2 petals. The ones that are going to be bigger later on, I give them 3 or 4 really, really big petals just so you can feel how close they are. And then I'll have some that are just 1 little dot because I want those to be a little bit more in the background. Remember, I said big florals in the foreground have 3 or 4. So I'm going to do some pretty big scoops and gently lay them on this flower that I'm imagining is in the very front of the painting. So it's going to be big and vibrant and so textured and fun. Don't be afraid to go big. You can go even bigger than the ones I'm doing here if you really want your painting to feel like you are just laying down in the grass in the midst of the wildflowers. This is the part where you can just enjoy the rest of the colors on your palette, making flowers in all sizes, and there's really no rhyme or reason to it other than just enjoying the process, and I think you'll really love how it turns out in the end. You can stop at any point if you like less flowers, if you like more flowers, just have a blast with it. I ended up having a lot of fun with these florals. I did way more than I thought I would, but honestly I enjoy it. I'm going to go back to my smaller palette knife now, and I'm going to touch up these clouds. I'm going to use this darker blue to kind of act as my shadow and add these small short strokes just because I really like the texture of it. So I'll start with this blue, and then after that I'll move on to the white and kind of go over it again and allow some of the blending to happen, just because sometimes when I do these paintings, I look back and I feel like the clouds are really flat, especially after having so much texture with the flowers. So I kind of like to go plump them up a little bit with the white. And there you go, it's done. Thank you so much for hanging in there with me if you made it this far. And I'm gonna put this up in a high place where my children can't reach it. It needs a couple hours to dry, and then it is ready to be framed. I hope you enjoyed doing this painting, and tag me on Instagram or Facebook with your paintings.